Welcome back to yet another video. Today we are going to discuss about Java interview question, the real Java interview questions which were asked in an IBM interview. So these are the collections of questions which are collated by asking him what questions were asked, and he has got a package of 19.2 LPA. So all questions ranging from core Java, Spring Boot, and microservices. This video will be helpful for the people who are preparing for an interview, for any interview, as well as if you are attending any IBM specifically interviews. So let's get started. The very first question which you get is in any interviews is tell me about yourself, right? So you have to explain what is your education, when did you pass out, what is your experience level, what kind of projects you have worked on, um, uh, where have you been working, right? How many companies have you worked, right? So this all information you have to share it and with a very confidence and a crisp short details. Now, when the questions is asked about what is your project architecture, explain me your current project architecture, what is the team structure. So you have to go in depth of the details of what is your project about, what is the functionality, what you have been working on, how is your value addition to the project, what happens, how many layers of the projects are there, right? What is the tech stack? How many team members are there? Whom do you are reporting to? How do you work, right? This all information you can share it, right? The roles and responsibilities. Now, when it comes to the basics, normally the process of an interview happens is that he asks the basic questions till the advanced, till in Java. So this is one of the OOPS concept and one of the core principle. But what do you mean by abstraction, right? So I'll give you an example. So this, as I mentioned, this is an one of the OOPS principle, and what exactly it is that it's a process of hiding an implementation details, and it only shows the essential features in an object, right? So when you're dealing with an abstraction in Java, we can handle abstraction using interfaces and the abstract classes. So abstract classes cannot be instantiated by their own, and it got both the abstract methods and also non-abstract method, which has got no method implementation. So, but when it compare with the interfaces, you can define those particular methods which can be implemented by the implementer of the classes, right? But after Java 8, there has been an introduction to default and static methods. So the main purpose or the primary purpose of abstraction is to focus what an object does rather than how it is going to do, right? So you doesn't know the implementation what it does, but you are only concerned about I mean what is required, right? So I give an example of an animal where you have written an abstract method that is sound, and we have a concrete implementation of an eat. So this is an abstract class, right? So now what happens is that the another class is going to extend the animal, and then it is going to implement their own sound, right? So every animal has got their own sound, right? So similar way, cat has extended it. Now, if you see the main class, if you see the animal is going to instantiate with the dog. Now, if you see, it is going to run that particular dog, which is going to be a dog sound, right? So that's what how it is going to be implemented, right? Now, when it comes to abstract classes, it will define, certain methods as I mentioned, right? So this each method is shared across all the subclasses. So this allows you to write a certain very flexible and the reusable code so that when you're dealing with the programming language like an abstract classes using the abstract classes, right? So it is going to I mean write in a specific implementation, I would say, that is using the how we have written this specific implementation, that is dog and cat, right? So we can write that reusable code. Now, this is one of the, I would say, important questions, and also it's quite confusing, I would say. So is Java pass by value or a reference? So uh, now in Java, you have, I mean, you must be knowing that Java is not purely object-oriented language for one reason, that is primitive types, right? So if it wasn't that primitive types, Java would be a fully object-oriented language. But yeah, so when you're dealing with primitive data types, right? So when you're passing certain parameters for the, let's say it is a primitive integer, double, right? The actual value is getting passed, and the method, right, is copied and it is passed in the method. So whatever changes inside the parameter, it will not affect the original value which was passed in, right? So, but when it comes to objects, right, when you're passing the object itself, the reference to the object, it is passed by value, right? So this means that the method received the copy of that particular reference to it. So any changes made to that particular object via that particular reference will definitely impact the original object. So, but reassigning the reference, it will not change the original references, right? So whatever you're making the changes, it will impact, right? So I'm here, if you see, I've just given an example of primitive type. Now if you see, I'm passing the change value method. If you see, I'm passing that int as a value, and I'm changing it to 50. But if you see, ultimately when it's trying to print, right, it is going to print the output as 10, right? So this is the value remains unchanged because it is passed by the only copy is passed actually. Okay, so here is an example of an object where, so if you see, there is a class of an object, and then there is an class implementing. Now, if you see box.size, if it is 50, right, which is an object, right, I've passed in. If you see, the modify object is the object is passed. Now, if you ultimately, if you see the object, right, it is I like in the reassigning the particular object. If you see box is equal to new 100, now I'm going to reassign it, right? Now ultimately, if you see the box, I've initialized it with the 10, right? So now if you see, when I'm calling that modify a box object, it is still going to I mean, it is going to print 50. Now after I reassign that particular method, right, with that particular passing the particular object, now if you see, I'm going to pass that particular 50, whatever it is there. So now if you see, the output will be 50, right? So now if you remember, there was an earlier, it is was 10, then now it has been 50, right? So what happens is that when you call that particular modify method, the method modifies via the object using the reference, right? So the changes still persist because the object itself is modified. So reassigning, when you're doing the reassigning the object inside the method, does not will impact, right? That will not impact that particular inside the main method, right? So hence the size of that particular things will be remain unchanged. Okay, now what is string pool and how string objects are created? What When you're dealing with string, right, string is something which is going to stored in a string pool, right? So when you're dealing with the literals, right, so it is in the there is a special area called string literals, string pool, sorry, but in the heap memory where this particular literals will be stored. So it is quite optimized, and it is reusable when it comes to using the string objects, right? So how objects are created is that when you're creating the literals, right, using the literal, the double quotes, right? So it is created, I mean, using the literals as I mentioned. So the JVM will check in the string pool if this string is already existing. The reference will pointing to that particular will be returned to it, right? And otherwise, it will create a new string in the string pool, right? Now, when you're dealing with new keyword, the string object is created using the new keyword. A new object is created in the heap, even if the same literal exists in the pool. So that's the difference, I would say, right? So now you see an example over here. We have created string 1, string 2, and string 3, right? Now, comparison between these two, if you're trying to compare with the equality operator, it will be quite same because they will be pointing to the same reference. Now, when you're comparing string 1 with the string 3, which is by using the literals and the new, then it will be different because S3, whatever it is, right? The string 3, which is on the heap, right? So it's different. So now you can be comparing the equals with the equality method, then it will be same because the content is same. Now, this string pool in the pool which are reused, it will save the memory. Right? Now, using the new keyword always will be creating the new object only. So that's the difference, I would say. Now, when you're dealing with multi-threading environments, these three things will behave different, and also this string buffer, and string builder, they are used for a different purposes. I mean, in a different context, I would say. So when you're dealing with string, it is one of the immutable objects. So you must heard of that string is an immutable class. So once the value is created, it cannot be changed. Now even every modification, whatever you do on it, it will going to create a new object, right? So it is quite thread safe, and the performance is quite slow when it. I mean, slower with a frequent modification. So it will perform. It will behave slower. Okay, and it is not recommended when you are trying to change too many objects for something, right? So instead you can use string builder or string buffer, but yeah, string buffer and string builder can be used in uh, I mean, it behaves differently when it is in worked in a multi-threading environment, right? So be very cautious to use it. So string builder, it is a mutable, so which can be modified uh, without using a new keyword, right? So it is not thread safe, but that's a problem. So it is not synchronized, but it is quite faster as compared to the, I mean, when you deal with a single threading environment. And string buffer, it is mutable, so but it is thread safe. It is unlike this particular string builder, which is not thread safe. It is thread safe. It is synchronized, so you can use it. But it is, as compared to string builder, right? It will be quite slow because it is there is an override of synchronization, right? So that's the difference. Okay. Now you will see here there is a table which I have written showcased over here. So in terms of mutability, thread safety, performance, the use cases, the synchronization, the memory usage, I have just noted down all this particular information. So this, I hope this video, this table is explainable, self-explanatory. Now, how does equals and hash code works, right? So this is one of the important topics, and when you're dealing with certain objects, right, it's quite important. And also, if you check this particular method, this are part of the object class, which is the super class of all the classes, right? Now, when you're dealing with the equals method, right, it determines uh, whether this particular two objects are logically equal or not, and the default implementation in object which will compare the double equal to, that is right. So you should override this particular methods for logical equality, right? Now when you're dealing with hash code, right, so it returns an integer which is an hash code, I would say, which will represent the object, right? But in terms like used in hash based collections, right? So like the hash code, this is used in HashMap, HashSet when you're trying to store something inside it, right? Now objects that are equals, using the equals will return true, right? Must have the same hash code. Now there are certain rules, okay? So what will happen is that I would say there is a possibility that when you are having an object, let's say A and then B, right? So it is going to be true. Then the hash code uh, of that, then the hash code is equal to the B hash code. So also should be true. So this is one of the condition. Let's say the hash code of A object and hash code of B object is not equals. Then A dot equals of B must also be false. Okay, this is one of the mandatory thing, right? So if the hash code is different, there might be a possibility that it is not same. So hash code can be generate the same value for a different object, but the equals method will ensure that particular equality. So there's a high possibility that the hash code, two objects can have same hash code, but it's when you compare with the equality operator, it is different. Okay. So these are the contract, I would say, between the hash code and the equals method in terms of when you're trying to store something and then inside the hash map or anywhere, right? Now, how HashMap works internally? Now, HashMap, there is a data structure internally. If you see, it uses an array of buckets where each bucket is a linked list, right? But when it comes to Java 8, right, after a certain threshold, from the linked list, it has been changed to a balanced tree, right? So if there is a frequent increase and update in that particular and it has crossed the threshold, it will be moved to a for a better performance. It will move to a balanced tree. Now, what happens in HashMap? It actually stores the value in a key value star, right? So there is a node which will in the each object it will be stored as an entry object in a bucket, right? Now there is an hashing involved. There is an hash code of that particular key is used to compute for the hash, right? So when you're trying to store something inside an index that is, I mean, inside an hash map. So first, the using the hash code with the help of hashing technique, it calculates the index of that particular thing where it has to store on which index it has to store that particular object. Now, there is a possibility of hash collision. If you want to handle that, right? So there might be a possibility that two key that generate the same bucket index, right? They are stored in the same bucket using the linked list. So when there is a collision happening, it will be stored in the same bucket with the help of the linked list, right? So, but later on with Java 8, if the bucket size, as I mentioned, it is going to exceed a certain threshold, it is the linked list will be converted to a balanced tree, which is a red black tree for a faster lookup. Now, when you're comparing certain keys, right, for the retrieval, when in terms of retrieval or when you want to update something, equals method plays a very important role to find the correctness of that particular from which, let's say that it identifies it from the bucket, right, which, and it will have a number of objects, right? It has to compare using the equality operator, right? Now there is a concept of resizing and rehashing when the number of entries in the load factor, that is of an when the hash map is initialized, right? So it is default is 0.75 in a hash map. And then it is going to resize it using that, and then it is reshuffles those particular entries, right? But internally, when you're trying to deal with an hash map, okay. So let's say you're trying to put something inside an operation as an operation, right? So first of all, it will compute the hash code. It will calculate the index of the bucket, then check for the collision of that particular thing, and then handle the it is a linked list or a tree, right? And then it is going to inside the key value pair inside it. Now, when in terms of get operation, we're trying to find something. First, it will calculate the hash of the key. Then it will calculate the bucket, which bucket it can be stored up. Then it will search using the equality operator, and then it will going to find that particular key, right? So points to remember here is that hash key offers an 0.1 O of 1 average time complexity when it used for put and get operation. So make sure you have a you're dealing with objects, you are having a proper implementation of equals and hash code for corrective functionality. Now, what is the purpose of volatile keyword? So this is one in terms of when you're dealing with a multi-threading environment. Right? So this keyword is a safeguard and ensurety that it ensures that there is a visibility and the order of the variables are updated across the threads, and it's quite handy when you are using with a multi-threading environment, right? So when in terms of visibility, when we say visibility, so changes made to that particular volatile variable by one of the threads will be immediately going to reflect to the other thread. There will be no cache involved in it. Okay, so there is a I mean, safeguard, and I would say it prevents the threads from caching this particular variable locally inside each thread. So you must be knowing that each thread has got their own local caching, right? So now when it comes to ordering, the the volatile keyword, which will prevent the reordering or re of an instruction involving the variable, right? So it ensures that there is a consistent execution order across, I mean, when you're using the concurrency, right? So it's quite important when you're using in the concurrent multi-threading environment, right? So the key points when you are dealing with volatile is that these variables are accessed by the multiple threads. So it ensures that every thread has a visibility and an updated, immediate updated version. So it is not, I would say, don't consider this as a replacement of an synchronized, because there are certain different, I mean, it's fall short when it comes to atomic city. You're trying to deal with an atomic city, right? So use synchronization, or there are some atomic integers which has been introduced when you want to deal with an atomic behavior. Now, what is the difference between iterator and the list iterator? So this used to be a very frequent question. Nowadays, if you see, this is less frequent in the interview question, but this was a question asked. So iterating, it's nothing but you're circulating, or you're going through that particular each element inside the any collections or an array, right? So you're dealing with iterator. So it's a general way of working with any of this particular collection, right? So, but when it comes to list iterator, it is quite more related to a list, right? So it can traverse backward, forward, and we can also modify the elements, right? So if you see here, iterator, it is applicable for all collections, right? Set, list. But when it comes here with a list iterator, it is only applicable for the list implementation, right? Not the direction. So when you compare with the iterator, it is only forward traversing, but list iteration can forward, backward, and front, right? Now add operation, it cannot add element in the iterator, but you can, with a list iterator you can add an element, right? You cannot remove, I mean, when you're trying to remove an element from the, you can remove it from the iterator. This also can remove from the right element. Now you cannot modify the element. You can modify the element in the list iterator. Now availability, there are certain next, has next, remove methods, but when it comes to list iterator, there has got some more methods: next, previous, has next, has previous, add, set, remove. I hope this difference is clear to you. Now what is the difference between comparable and comparator? So this is used in terms of when you want to implement certain natural sorting order or a customized sorting, right? So you have to deal when you're dealing with certain natural ordering, or you wanted to have a certain custom order. So the main purpose of this comparable interface is it is going to sort it using the natural sorting order, right, for the object. But when you compare it with the comparator, it provide a custom ordering of an object, right? You can do more than one customization to it, right? The methods which are used is comparative method, which is going to compare the current object with the one which is going to comparing, right? But when it comes to comparator, you can compare the two objects of that, so that you can have a more flexibility when it comes to comparing. Now the class whose objects needs to be compared, right? It is implemented by it, right? But you can have an external class when it a comparator, right? So it can have an external class, you can compare any object, right? That's the difference. Modifies, now modifies, right? So the whole class modifies the class whose objects are being compared. So you're going to touch base that particular class itself. But when you compare with the comparator, you doesn't need to modify that particular class. You can independently can independently use that particular use. So that's the difference. Now, as I mentioned, with comparable, the natural only one order can be done, natural sorting order. Uh, when you're dealing with comparator, it is multiple custom ordering can be done in it, right? So when you want to, I mean, when do we use it? Is it when you have a single natural, you want a single natural ordering, right? In that case, you use comparable. But let's say you wanted to use in a multiple ways, right? Or you want to compare with a different objects with a different ways, right? So you can use comparator. How do you create a thread safe array list? Now, you already know that the array list is not thread safe. So how do you do that? And what are the alternatives when it comes to making it thread safe? So uh, when there was no provision of copy on write array list, right, prior to the concurrency API, right? So earlier there used to be a provision where you used to call that the collection dot synchronize list when this particular array list is wrapped inside this particular the collection dot synchronized list. So this will is to make that particular list as a thread safe by synchronizing all its methods, right? So if you see synchronizing all this all the list methods, but you need to manually synchronize during the iteration. So that's the way we used to do. But when it comes to Java 8 and sorry, Java concurrency API, right? So there was an introduction of copy on write array list. So this is part of the util concurrent package, as I mentioned, and it is quite thread safe, and there is no need for synchronization. So it is ideal in the case of multi-threading environment, and when there is a list can frequently read but infrequently modified. So in that case, you can use it's quite thread safe and has a better performance when it comes to read writes and few writes. Now, uh, you wanted to ask me, you wanted that particular person to explain how the concept of class loading works in JVM. Now, there is a concept, as I mentioned, which when you're trying to load some classes, right, there is a process which is involved. So it will check in different locations where this particular class is available, whether it is available in the core API, whether it's a new class. So in order to do that, there are certain steps involved in it. Okay. So it ensures that particular your class is loaded into the memory before it is executed, right? So that's JVM will take care of it, and also the sequence, or I would say what it specifically follows is that it will load, verify, and initialize the classes. So it ensures that the class is available and when needed and when the and it will help in the memory management of that, right? So the steps involved in class loading is that first it loads the class file from the class path or from the external jar source file, jar file, wherever it is. But classes are loaded only when it is first reference that is lazily loaded. It is quite lazily loaded. Now linking, the verification, I would say. So ensure that the bytecode is valid. Internality is going to check that and it is confirmed with the JVM specification. So it ensures that everything is according to the specification. Now preparation, it will allocate certain memory for the static variables, set them to the default values. There are some prerequisite which is done, right? Now resolution. Now what happens in that it will replace the symbolic references like the class name with the direct references, right? After that, it is going to initialize it. It is going to execute the initialize the static block in the class. This step is done when the class is first used. Now, there are different types of class loader involved. One is bootstrap class loader, one is extension class loader, and one is system class loader. So you can also write your own custom class loader, right? So if you see the bootstrap class loader, it is going to load the classes from the java.lang class from the RT char. Now extension class load is going to load from the extension directory of the JDK or the libraries of the JDK extension folder. System class loader is loaded from the class path which where you are running, right? The Java program, right? You can create your own custom class loader. You can create using the unload that particular class from the location or from the network. Now he is asked to write a palindrome program So over the screen sharing, he asked to write what is the, I mean, can you write us a palindrome program? So a palindrome is nothing but a word which is, if you write it from the, if you compare it from the start to end and also from back to the front, right? It is going to be the same. Let's say Madam, MADAM, right? So if you reverse it and write it, it is going to be the same name. There is will be no difference in it. So that's what the palindrome is about. So here, if you see, here I've removed all the spaces which is there, and it is converted into the lower cases. Then what it is done is that initializing the pointers, some variables are left, right, and then I've taken the length of that, and then it will going to check the, I mean, it's going to check it with the left with the right, right? And then if it is not same, right, if it is a condition, the character which is going to pick it up, right, and it is not same, right, so it is going to return a false, because automatically from the start it is going to check, and it, so the first element and the last element, if it is same, the second element and the second last element is same, ultimately to the middle, right, if it is everything is same, it will be a palindrome, right? So that's the logic. So ultimately, if it is everything is say same, then it will be return the true. But there was another programming question which was asked, which was, can you find the largest or the smallest number in the array? So he has given a array which will have the integer number. So basically, if you see here, I've given one. By default, I've given a value of the largest and the smallest, and then I've written a for loop where I'm just comparing the number with the largest number, which is going to be the thing. So I'm going to compare it over there and see if it is greater than or not, and then I will replace the largest number. Similarly, the reverse logic I applied for the smallest number. So in this way, I will both find the largest and the smallest number from this particular. Now, he has also asked me to write it in the Java 8 version when I explained this. I mean, the person who he interviewed it. So here it is, if you see, the similar logic is applied, and then if you see, there is a method from the arrays, it is first converted into a stream of the particular using the particular array, and then there is a maximum, right, and then it is going to print it as a get at as int, right? Similar way for the minimum. So in this way, this is quite concise, and Java 8 gives you a benefit in writing those. Now, what is serialization and deserialization, and what is UID? So, serialization process is nothing but you're converting certain object into a byte stream, and so that it can be either stored in a file, database, or a memory, and it can be transmitted over the network. So, you must implement a serializable interface so that JVM understand that it is going to, I mean, the class going to implement that particular serializable interface, right? It will understand that it's a special class and it has to be serialized. So serialization, deserialization is nothing but the reverse of serialization. It is going to convert from the back by stream to the object. So it is going to create an original object. Now, when you're dealing with an serialization, deserialization, it's very important that whatever the objects we had actually converted into a byte stream, the same object is recreated, and same thing is there, right? So, in order to ensure that the UID is having, there is a unique identifier which is called UID, which ensure that in a certain there is no manipulation done into it. So the structure is not changed or something is not modified by the deserialization process. So it ensures that it is valid and it is quite safe. So in case if it is not matching or there is some manipulation, it will throw an invalid class exception, right? So that's about serialization and deserialization. What kind of design patterns have you used in your project? Can you name some of them? Uh, right. So these are the questions. So be prepared with behavioral, structural, creational design patterns. Not only naming it, but you have to be very cautious about naming, because he might go in depth and then he may ask certain counter questions, which you should be well prepared of. Right. Now, solid principle, this is quite important, I would say, when it comes to coding and also adhering to the principles, or you're writing a very efficient code, right? So it gives you a bit efficient way of writing your code. So that's where the solid principle is about. So what happens is that uh, single responsibility. The very first thing is single. So if you see for the each solid, each character, there is a certain principle associated with it. So when you're dealing with certain, the first principle is single responsibility principle. So it says that you have to design your class in such focus so that it is only doing a single responsibility. It should not have multiple responsibilities to do that. So you should design that particular class in such way. Now, the second principle says open close principle. So it says that your class should be extended, and then you write your own implementation instead of modifying the existing, right? So that's the second principle. Now, list course principle. So this is means that you have a subtype and a supertype, right? So subtype should be exactly substitutable for the supertype. So that's what the scope principle says about. Now, interface segregation. Now, what it exactly means is that you define a specific interfaces instead of a very in general specific interfaces, so that it should not implement that unwanted behavior or interfaces which or methods which is not required for that particular or it is not specific to that particular implementation. Okay. So dependency inversion principle, which says that you should be dependent as much on the abstraction instead of the concrete implementation. So be quite abstract and use it. Now, what is Spring Boot and how it is different from the Spring framework? Now, what is Spring Boot? It is one of the framework which is built on top of Spring framework, okay, which will ease your development when it comes to Java-based application. So it is designed in such a way that it will make your it is easy to create your standalone application, production grade Spring Boot application with certain minimal configuration. Okay. Now, when it comes to the key components or the features, I would say auto configuration. Now, auto configuration, it will automatically configure all your application based on the dependencies which are mentioned in your projects. Now, standalone application, what it means is that though you doesn't need to write an external or need an external web server where you need to deploy that. So Spring Boot internally has an embedded server like Tomcat and Jetty, right? So that's one of the advantage. Production ready, so it provides features like metrics, health checks, external configuration, which are quite important when you are running your application in a production environment. Embedded server we already discussed, so it supports the Tomcat and Jetty. So you doesn't need to directly create a jar and then you have to deploy it. Right? You can directly deploy it. Minimal configuration, so it eliminates all unwanted configuration or a complex configuration which it was to do in the XML. So, and also it will reduce the boilerplate code, right? So that's the advantages when it compare with the Spring to Spring framework, right? How does that Spring Boot auto configuration works? Now we already discussed this, one of the important feature of Spring Boot. Now, auto configuration is a feature that will automatically configure your Spring Boot application based on the beans or the libraries present in the class path and the application setting. So it will eliminate the need of you need to write the external configuration. So it is quite easy to set up this Spring application. So how it works is that there are different annotations like at the rate enable auto configuration. This is the core annotation that tells the Spring is automatically going to configure the beans, automatically going to configure the beans based on the available class path resources. So it often used in the combination with the at the rate Spring Boot application. So this is an starting annotation where the application starts from. It has got the main method inside that particular class. So this is where it starts. So there is a conditional based configuration which says that or a certain annotation or a certain condition on a class or a certain condition on a missing bean which will load to only when there is a certain condition met, right? Presence of a class or a property, then only this particular classes are loaded, right? Uh, Spring factories. Now, if you see at the meta of spring.factories, there is you need to register. I mean, it uses this particular meta spring.factory file to register certain auto configuration classes. So these classes are loaded during the application startup, right? And configuration classes, there are certain at the rate configuration when you define that annotate with, right? So it is going to automatically configure, automatically import those particular classes and apply the Spring context based on the conditions. Okay, this is how it internally works. Now, how do you implement validation in Spring Boot using the annotation, right? So, validation, which is an validation mechanism using the JSR, I would say 303, uh, along with the Hibernate validator. So, this is quite easy, and you can apply the validation annotation directly on that particular model like Pojo class fields and it will automatically validate that input. So how to do that I will just explain you. So if you see for implementing the validation you need to add dependencies in the pom.xml or in the gradle xml, right? So in that you have to add this particular validation string, that starter, right? Then you have to create a model class with the annotating address and annotations which we have used, that is an at the rate, not null, size, email. Now if you see with the just before the property, I have added not null, size, email, minimum value. So these are the annotations which we can use it for the validation. Now at the rate valid is used to I mean, in the controller basically, when you're dealing with the controller. So in Spring controller, it uses at the rate valid when you are triggering certain validations on certain incoming request, right? So here, if you see the REST controller, now if you see the method create user, it has got an at the rate valid user interface. So it will check for that, and if it is successfully, it will go for the next thing. So how you handle validation errors, right? So in this, if you see, there are certain validation globally or locally, right, using the exception handler. Now, you're binding that particular result, I would say. So in this, actually, what you do is that if you see there is an at the rate request body and then at the rate val, so you are using the binding result over here. So you're going to check that if there are certain errors or not, right? If it is certain error, then it is going to return that particular errors, or it will say that there are no errors. So, well, annotations which I already discussed, these are the annotation, not null, size, email, pattern, minimum, max, right? So we can use this for validation purpose. Now, what is the difference between one to many, one to one, I mean, many to many, right? This is used in context of database, and when you're trying to map it in the object-oriented framework, right? So like Spring Data, JPA, or Hibernate, right? So this annotation is quite helpful when you want to define certain relationship between the entities and what kind of relation it is, right? So when you have certain entities which are a part of another entity, right? So you make use of this when you're dealing with certain collections let's say a number of things, right? So first we'll discuss about one-to-one, which is a relationship between the two entities. In this case, there is one entity which is associated with only one instance of the another entity. So the person can have one passport, and each passport will only belong to one person. So the database, you have to have a foreign key which is placed in the one table linking to the, which will be a linkage to the board table, right? Now, one to many, it represents one to many relationship. In so one instance of then entity is associated with many instances of another entity. So let's say a department can have many employees, right? But each employee will belong only to the one department, right? So that's the way. So maybe database mapping, many sides. In this case, it would be an employee which has got foreign key referencing in the department, right? So that can be the relationship maintained. Now there can be a relationship which says many to many. So in case of multiple instances, can be associated with multiple instances of another one, right? So a student can be enrolled in many courses, and also each courses can be have many students also, right? So this is how a join is created between these two to map this particular relationship between the two entities, and also a foreign key pointing to the particular table. Hope this difference is clear to you. Now, what is the difference between fetch type, lazy, and the eager type, right? So when it comes to dealing with the objects, right, and especially in the JPA, right? So it will determine your underneath class has to be loaded from the database or not, or underneath thing has to be loaded from the database or not. So eager means you are trying to load that particular immediately when you are trying to uh, load that. So basically, the related entities, or the one which is the parent, let's say the parent is there, is loaded first. So regardless of whether they are accessed or not, it will be loaded with that particular when it is and the parent entity is loaded. Okay. So when to use it is that you use when you wanted the particular related entities to be loaded when the parent entity is loaded, right? You doesn't need to call that database again in order to load it. So it will at the start only it will load at the start of the application. So yeah, there is a performance impact because what will happen is that it will load all related for the each of that particular thing. So there is a performance impact, and make sure you do it when it is required, not simply for the sake of doing it as an eager, right? So lazy type H type is related to only the related entities will only loaded when it is first time accessed. Okay, so there is a delay. I would say delay as in like whenever it is required, then only we call it. As if it is not required, then you doesn't need to access the database and reference it, right? So that has a performance improvement, you would say. But when to use it, I would say is like you doesn't want that particular related entities to be loaded, and you can avoid unnecessary database queries when it is not required, right, by the user. So beternally, there is a definitely a better performance improvement is there, but this can lead to you need to write a different queries in order to get the data, right? So that's the approach. What is the difference between native queries and JPL queries, right? So now when you compare with JPQL, it's an object-oriented way of writing the entities queries, right? The native queries is quite SQL based, so you have to write the exact query for the database. Now entity level, you define queries on the JPA entities. Now you define queries on the based on the tables actually, which are related in the tables. So what happens? Now there is no, I would say, independence, I would say. So when it comes to SQL native things, right, you have to write a specific, but when it comes to database, it is quite independent. So you can write it, you can deal with an object, right? So that has got an advantage when it comes to the native queries. But this maybe have a little bit less performance when compared to the SQL. But yeah, SQL sites queries may have that particular efficient, especially using complex relationship or queries joins, right? Uh, Generally, I mean, it is used for a general querying the relationship of the particular. You want to load certain data, right? Certain entity, right? You can use JPQL, but there's a complex or have a certain complex specific vendor specific features which needs to be loaded. You can use the specific complex query, SQL query. Okay, so how do you handle service to service communication? This was, I mean, this is quite frequently asked in microservice context. So you can handle using the asynchronous and synchronous. So when you're dealing with synchronous, you can use REST API, GPRC, which will give you a real-time response, right? But when you're dealing with asynchronous, you can use RabbitMQ, Kafka, ActiveMQ. So this is where we can make use of. So there are different ways we can communicate within the service to service communication. Now, how you handle distributed transaction once the data consists. So this is quite a disadvantage also, and one of the advantages. But it is a challenge where you, when you're across the services, you wanted to have a centralized I mean, you want to maintain the data consistency in a decentralized services, right? So it has got their its own challenges, right? So the data consistency is quite important. So to ensure that data consistency, there is a data saga design pattern which is used, which is data orchestration or choreography pattern which is used. So a series of local transactions are executed across the services, which each service is managing its own database, right? So and the transaction. So if there is sudden failure, so there will be a compensating transaction triggered to roll back or mitigate that particular steps. So another approach is the eventual, I mean, consistency, I would say, which is where the communicate synchronously communicate using the Kafka to synchronize the data, right? With without needing a very strong consistency between the applications. You should avoid using two-phase commit because this is not recommended way. Um, circuit breaker design pattern. Now, this is one of the important design pattern and also important feature with respect to the fault tolerance. So it will handle your application or a distributed system failure in a graceful way, and also it will avoid unnecessary repetitive calls to the failing services. So it gives certain time at a certain time frame. It will allow certain requests to be handled and it is able to recover or not, right? So it's a protective mechanism so that which is similar to the electrical circuit, but that it will break like if the connection if there is certain failure, right? So after a certain specific timeout, it will restore back. Right? So there are three states: closed, open, and half open. So these are quite important, and uh, based on the certain request or bidden service availability or not availability, this particular states are service can be in particular state, right? You can configure it accordingly. So as I mentioned, it is commonly used in the microservice architecture when you're dealing with certain services. Now, how do you handle versioning? So this is one of the important questions when it comes to versioning. So in microservices, when you're writing API, right? API versioning is very quite important, and it is used for backward compatibility when you are there's a constant evolution in the system, right? So the common ways I mentioned here is that URI versioning, right? So the versioning is specified in the URL path. So it's most common approach. So if you see here, V1, V2, it is mentioned, right? So there is an also a header-based versioning which is used in the custom. I mean, the request header only it will allow the URL to remain the same, but in the header only it will accept as an like either certain parameters in it, right? So now, query parameters, I would say. So this is the version is passed in the query parameter in the URL. If you see here after the question mark, you see version is equal to 1, right? This is one way to handle it. Content negotiation. This is specified in the accept or the content type header, I would say. So specifically, you can mention that the application JSON or version is equal to 1, certain like that, right? Semantic versioning. Semantic versioning is basically a versioning which is going to like major, minor, and the patch version basically. So it will deal and it will understand that how it is a major or a minor changes, right? That's the whole idea about it. What is the difference between union and the UNML? Now, this is one of the important questions when it comes to SQL, right? So, union will combine the result of the two queries and also it will remove the duplicates. Okay, so all the distinct row in the both the queries will be written, but when it comes to union all, it will combine the queries of the two, right? the result of the two, and then also it will include the duplicate also. So there is no segregation or removal of the duplicate keys. So that's the difference. Now, how do you optimize the SQL queries for the better performance? Now, there are certain steps for improving the performance, like focusing on indexing, query structure, efficient data retrieval, right? So use indexes on that particular column so that wherever you're going to frequently access, like in the where clause, join, or the order by clause, so that it will the speed up is quite fast. Lookup is fast. Now avoid using select star so that it only fetches the specific columns and it also retrieve the minimal data. So it is the data which is transferred from the database to your application, which is quite minimal. Okay, the leverage making use of the join so that or instead of using the subquery, so that it is generally faster as compared to the subquery, right? Uh, Implement query caching, ensure that there is a static data is which is up to date from the database, so that it optimizes your query, right? Limit your results with certain limits or top, so that you are only returning certain specific filtering rows in order to the full table or a join, right? Or data, I would say, unnecessary thing. Lastly, I would say analyze the execution to identify some certain bottleneck, and then definitely indexing on certain or optimizing the query strategies. Normalization, this is an important aspect when you're designing the database tables, right? So 1NF, 2NF, and 3NF. So normalization process of organizing your database where the data is having the minimum redundancy and also the dependency between it is divided into the large table into the smaller table so that the relationship is established between this table. And also it will reduce the data anomalies and improve the data integrity, right? The first normalization, what it does is that it will, I would say, it has got these each unique records, right? So that's the first NF. So it should ensure that there is an uh, unique things. Second normalization, it requires the first normalization, and also it ensures that there are new key, no non-key key are fully functionally dependent on the primary key, I would say, right? There is no partial dependency, I would say. Third one is like you have the particular achieve the second NF, and also eliminates the transitive dependency, that is non-key attribute depend on the other non-key. So this is how you deal with the normalization. I hope this is explanatory, self-explanatory, and also you are aware of it. How would your query using the MongoDB? When you're dealing with NoSQL, right? There are different way. It has got its own way to query it, right? So, and MongoDB, if you are aware, it's a NoSQL and also it's a document-based DB. So you can use some methods like find, which will allow you to filter certain based on certain specific criteria. So here is an example: db.collection.find. And you'll find it in all the document which is equal to the value, right? If you want to find all the document where age is 25, you can use the find using the age attribute, right? Comparison. So if you see here, I mentioned all this particular limitation result, limit the result, projection, combining the logical operator. These are the examples I've given. Now, what are the limitation when you are using the NoSQL, right? So there is quite lack of standard, I would say. So it's widely variant in terms of features, querying. It is quite harder and it across the different system to use it, right? API, it's quite difficult to maintain. Eventually, there is a consistency problem. So eventually the consistency rather than a strong consistency, I would say, which is the disadvantage, I would say. So which can lead to a data inconsistency, right, across the distributed system. Now, query, there is a limited query capability. So NoSQL is lack of a query language, like how it is used, like joins or complex queries or transaction or asset, right? So it is less suitable for where there is a requirement of a complex query. Data redundancy due to the schema flexibility, no SQL can lead to a data. I mean, this can lead to a data duplication and also increase cost of because storage, right? So it is increases the cost. Scalability trade-off. While NoSQL database are scalable horizontally, achieving the consistency and the partitioning and the toleration, but often requires certain trade-offs to be done. Like there is a consistency problem, I would say. I hope this video was helpful to you, and also it has shed some light on what are the kind of interview questions are asked in actual interviews, the real interviews. If this video was helpful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you.